bit about the strategic priorities that we have on behalf of the Secretary and Administration. And I will focus in particular in terms of some of the work that we're doing in public affairs, in terms of innovation in 21st century statecraft. But I would begin by saying that all of this is possible because we have a great leader, Secretary Clinton, who empowers us, the career folks, to be creative, to be energetic, to take risks, and to do what we need to do to make sure that America remains the preeminent power and the top authority and leader in the world. And I have to say that seeing what she's been doing this week in Beijing, real time, real diplomacy, it's remarkable. And she and her team have been working extremely hard. I'm sure you're following her every move. At least we certainly are back here. Let me just touch on, again, a few of these key priorities. That's not to say that I will mention everyone, because as you know, the State Department, through all our embassies around the world, we do a lot of work that's significant and meaningful, so I don't mean to omit anything, and perhaps in the Q&A I will get inevitably questions, so why didn't you mention this or that? That's not to say that it's not a priority, it's just that we only have, by now, only about 15 minutes. So let me just start with saying, with President Obama and Secretary Clinton coming into office, it became vital and important for us to assert American leadership around the world. And everything that she and the President have done for the past 3 years has been focused and intended to ensure that we are carrying out our mission in leading the world. And I have to say, I've had the great privilege of not only traveling with her, but also with President Obama in the last 3 UN General Assemblies. And it's quite evident that the world wants to hear what America has to say. That's not to say that they agree with us. That's not to say that they all appreciate what we have to say always. But they want America to be part of that conversation. And we as diplomats want to be part of that conversation. That's what's tremendous about the work that we're able to do, because we're engaging with everyone, friend and foe alike. Why? Because we want to promote America's interests and promote them aggressively around the world, and we are doing that. Secondly, in recognition of that leadership, we must also work with others, and partnerships are critical, and we recognize our strategic alliances, historical strategic alliances like NATO, like that we have with the Republic of Korea, Japan, Australia, others around the globe, and we must preserve those. And we've seen what a successful alliance can do with, in particular in Libya, with the demise of Muammar Gaddafi, and working with new groupings like the Gulf Cooperation Council and other regional organizations, and also through our work at the UN. But we understand that partnerships are important in meeting the common challenges that we face and also taking advantage of the opportunities that may arise. As part of that, we also recognize emerging powers, whether we're talking about Brazil or Turkey or Indonesia or South Africa. These are countries on the rise. We need to recognize that, and we are working and partnering with them. I should also mention India. And then there are 2 other countries that obviously are clearly established with whom we have important relationships, Russia and China. With those 2 in particular, we have disagreements, and we voice those directly, frankly, as part of our ongoing dialogue based on mutual respect. But as we do that, we recognize that those relationships are important, and where we can partner, we do so in order to advance America's interests. Now, the last year has been very much consumed by developments throughout the Middle East, the so-called Arab Spring. And we recognize that this poses a tremendous challenge, but as the Secretary looks at the region, also see that there are opportunities as we work with the peoples of the region to try to meet their long-wanting aspirations in terms of their political, economic rights. And again, it's something that we are seized with, recognizing that how the Middle East develops in the next few years will determine much of what will happen in terms of our security in the coming century. We then have, as you've seen and read about, put a tremendous focus on the Pacific and ensuring that the United States is a Pacific power. The Secretary's first trip as Secretary of State was to Asia, and that was by design. And President Obama held a successful summit in Honolulu, Hawaii, last November, APEC summit, in which he outlined a lot of this vision that we've been implementing through our diplomacy and making clear that we want to be partners in Asia, we are a presence in Asia. Moving on to a couple other key core elements. The Secretary, you've probably seen quite a bit, has elevated the role of economics in foreign policy. Now, every one of you knows that we have always had a role in promoting our economic policy and our businesses, but what the Secretary has really put an emphasis on, working with Deputy Secretary Knights and many in this building, is to ensure that it is a foremost priority, primarily because President Obama and Xi recognized that unless we're economically strong at home, we won't be able to project our power as successfully abroad. So as we work, as the President and his team work to strengthen the economy at home, the State Department plays a role. And we have our 1,000 or so economic officers out doing the work, doing jobs diplomacy, and this is something that we want to make sure is foremost on our ambassadors' minds as they carry out their missions. Again, we've been doing this in the past, but what we've seen is renewed emphasis and effort. As you all know, as part of our traditional, we have also been promoting human rights around the world. But what the Secretary has done is put an additional focus on women's rights and girls' empowerment. And why is this important? Well, not only is it the right thing to do, after all, 50% of the world's population is female, and I'm glad to see we have a lot of them in the room here today. We need to do that because the factual evidence is that when women and girls are involved in their societies, both politically and economically, that those countries tend to be more stable and prosperous. And what is remarkable is that by putting this on the agenda in the way that Secretary Clinton has, of course we need to recognize others have before her, like Secretary Albright and her and successors, that it is really encouraging that in almost any meeting that the Secretary participates in, if she doesn't raise it, someone, her foreign counterpart, will find a need to at least talk about it. And this is important in terms of, as we move forward, in terms of promoting our foreign policy. Finally, a couple other notes. On transforming the way we execute diplomacy, Undersecretary Kennedy talked about the QDDR and the kind of innovative thinking that is taking place. And what the Secretary has asked us to do, as she has talked about smart power, is to make sure we're using all elements, all tools available to the United States, diplomacy and development, to project our influence and to engage people around the world. And it's not just about government-to-government relations, but that we must be speaking to civil society, to business groups, to rising young leaders. We need to really be out there and getting a feel and a pulse for what is happening in those countries. Again, we've been doing this, but it's important that we be very focused on doing that kind of outreach. And that's where we sort of move on to some of the efforts we're doing in public affairs, in what she calls 21st century statecraft and innovation. She has challenged us to come up with ways to try to communicate better. And I'm proud to say that I think the State Department is the leading agency in our government in terms of use of social media and use social media platforms and tools to communicate with the people around the world as well as the American people. We have launched 10 foreign language Twitter feeds, the major languages in particular. We have been using Facebook, YouTube, we have been using the internet to do virtual press conferences. And the focus here and intent here is to ensure that it is us, American diplomats, that are projecting our narrative, that it's coming through our voices, Nobody does that better perhaps than the Secretary herself, and she does press availabilities nearly every day. But the rest of us have to do our part, and she wants and has empowered officers at all levels to be out there speaking to student groups, to different audiences, both press and academic, to ensure that our story is told by us. This means we do compete with other foreign state-owned news agencies, whether it's Xinhua of China or Itar-TASS of Russia, or even looking at how Al Jazeera may be doing its reporting. So we need to be out there, and we're doing so increasingly, and I think it is bearing some fruit. Again, we're recognizing that there is such a wealth of information out there that we need to be where the audiences are. We need to reach out to them. They're not necessarily going to come to us or even be listening to our daily press briefing. We need to find ways to engage. It also, things like Twitter also give us instant feedback as far as how our policies are being received in very real time. It puts a lot of pressure on our policymakers in terms of developments happening around the world. It accelerates the decision-making process. But public affairs is being integrated more and more in a good way into the policymaking process, so that we have a good sense, or at least have some sense, of how our policies might be received when we enunciate them. Now, this is critical, and I think you'll all agree, important, because words matter, and the way in which we communicate our policies does affect the way that they are received. Lastly, I'll just touch on just the general sort of guidance for all of us from the Secretary is, how can we do better? Every day we come in and we face a slew of incoming. We try to project longer term, and that's one of the hardest things in Washington, is where are we going to be a week from now, 2 weeks from now, dare I say a month or two, or maybe a year from now. But we are trying to look to see how we can be doing better in terms of our every function, and this is across the board. How can we be thinking ahead, where we need to be positioned in the future, and how to best get there? And that's where the Quadrennial Diplomacy and Defense and Development Review comes in. Everybody is meant to be engaged to get these ideas out and to establish best practices and to move forward, and to, every 4 years, certainly be looking at ourselves to make sure that we are on track and we're doing the best we can. And what the Secretary has certainly done is elevate the role of diplomacy and development with defense. We recognize the incredible role of the men and women in uniform and the incredible work that's done by the Department of Defense. But we do fantastic work as well. And we need to have that recognized. And that's a hand to the work that you've done and the legacy that you've passed on to us, the new and, well, perhaps younger generation. And we're very proud of the work we do, and we want to show it to the American people and to the world. So we are doing that. I hope you feel good about the direction that we're headed. We have tremendous leadership, not only from the Secretary, but obviously the career folks, Deputy Secretary Bill Burns. Of course, you saw Pat Kennedy, but we also have people like Tom Nides and Wendy Sherman and Cheryl Mills, all of them working as a team at all levels. And pretty soon, I don't know if Maria Otero's here, but when she comes in, she will address you. But again, there's a real team effort. We're in this together at all ranks, trying to push forward our best interests, recognizing the important role that we play. So I don't know if there's time for perhaps a couple questions, but I'd be happy to. Yeah, great. Yeah, please.
Thanks. I'm Pete Shutley. You spent most of your time on overseas, which is appropriate. My question is U.S. domestic, public support for the State Department. And my specific question is not what your whole budget is, but how much of Public Affairs Bureau is focused on winning U.S. domestic public support for our foreign policy. And the American people don't have a good clue what federal agencies do, and they don't have a good understanding of all the things state does. So my question is, your budget, how many people work on U.S. domestic?
That's an excellent question and a tough one. After all, we're not the Forestry Service, as I've discovered. We, and part of public affairs is our Bureau's mandate is to communicate to the American people. But I do find it is hard to convince some of my colleagues to travel to Nebraska or Iowa or somewhere close to home than it is to travel halfway around the world to meet with some foreign leader. But we are trying to do more of that. It's not a question so much of budget, because now we can even do that virtually, and we are, through our sort of innovative new technologies, connecting more with universities and audiences across the United States. But there's no question that we need to do a better job of letting the American people know of the fine work that we do. And I hope all of you are involved in some way in your communities in spreading that word, because it is up to us. Nobody else is going to do it for us. We need to be out there telling people what it is that we do. And frankly, I've had the great privilege of doing a fair amount of travel myself. I was recently in North and South Dakota, went up to Philly just a few days ago, and we were received extremely well. People are shocked to hear that we're only 1% of the federal budget. People believe, I think, once they hear that we're an incredible investment on their dollar. If we, after all, if we do our work well and succeed in diplomacy and development, we won't have to deploy our brave men and women out there into harm's way. We won't have to expend treasure to solve some of these problems. It's not easy. We don't always manage. We do the best we can. And as we all know in diplomacy, some things actually stay secret. So it's very hard to sometimes pound our chest. But there's a lot we can talk about. We need to do more. We're not dedicating lots of funding to it, but we are certainly increasing our effort. And again, we do communicate on a daily basis through our press briefing in real time with the American press. And granted, they're usually only interested in bad news stories. So our challenge is how to get out the positive narrative. And now with, in fact, the advent of blogs and Twitter, we need to continue to do that. Anybody, all of you, can be out there telling our story and help us do that. Thank you.
Hi,
Yes.
My name is Ann Wright, and in 2003 I was one of 3 Foreign Service officers who resigned in opposition to the war in Iraq. I'm an equal opportunity critic, though, and my concern right now is on this drone program that the United States has. And you, as a public affairs person, a spokesperson for the U.S. government, my concern is the blowback we're going to get from these drones. There's the extrajudicial killing that's going on right now, to include American citizens, the proliferation of drones, where we now have, the U.S. is the highest seller of drones, and now we're having a new export arms program to sell even more weapons. The United States sells NATO $10 billion worth of drones, $100 million were sold by Israel to Russia, and then just yesterday Russia says, well, we have the right to preemptively strike the American missile defense system. So I'm really concerned about these drones and the blowback, the easy blowback from small groups all around the world using that same technology on them. Thank you.
Well, first, thank you very much for your service, and I do appreciate your concerns. Secondly, and this is not going to be terribly satisfying, we don't talk about that very much.
Brennan says you talk about it.
I heard John Brennan, I did too. He can talk about it. What I will say, again, is the President of the United States has a duty and obligation to defend the American people, to protect the American people. And he will take actions that he feels are necessary within the established, legal framework, which Harold Koh has talked about from this building, to ensure that the actions we take protect the American people. And so what I can assure you is that tremendous thought, consideration, deliberation, consultation happens in relation to what you may be talking about. And so I would hope that, I know you've been in government, you left for an important reason on principle, we admire that. But you also know that there are very good people, patriotic Americans throughout this government trying to do the right thing. And they're guided by the right values, and that's how we come to the decisions.
Can I just, on the drones, I've heard that the U.S. Embassy has 2 drones that fly over the embassy in Baghdad. Is that true as part of the...
That was corrected actually subsequent to that, but I can't get into the specifics of it. But there are different kinds of flying things, and they shouldn't be confused.
You're a good public affairs guy.
Yeah, a short one, I'm told. Those are always the toughest ones, though.
Hello, I'm Harvey Lyford. I was in USIA for 26 years. In that time, I only did 2 things that were remotely science related. One was introducing 2 Gemini astronauts to Haile Selassie, and the other was presenting a moon rock to Papa Doc Duvalier.
We want that rock back.
In retirement, I've become a science writer, and I realize that other embassies have science-trained people, and in my experience, we don't still. And I'm wondering if any effort is being made to improve the science literacy of regular Foreign Service officers. I'm not talking about specialists who go to a particular meeting.
Well, I know it would help me with my 11th grader, because he knows a heck of a lot more than I do. No, it's a very fair and good point. There is some training that takes place at FSI, probably not enough, and we do need to be knowledgeable about these issues. And we do a fair amount of outreach, if it's not out of state, other agencies, and we have so-called science envoys that we've been sending out to engage future generations, because that is the way that we'll find many of the solutions that are needed to address questions of climate change, to address questions of technologies that can help us. So it's a fair point. We probably should be doing more. We do have an emphasis on it, or at least a recognition that science is important and that it should be incorporated more into the work that we do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. It is now my pleasure to introduce Undersecretary for Civilian Security, Democracy, Human Rights, Maria Otero.
Thank you so much, Linda, and it really is a great pleasure to be here with you and to be able to speak to you today. I was just remarking, you own this building. I mean, you spend so much of your time here. It's so wonderful to be able to share a few minutes with you, especially given that I am privileged to be able to serve as an undersecretary. I want to start by congratulating Ross Ridgway for receiving the DACOR Cup and for her contributions to the U.S. foreign policy making. I hope she feels better soon. I also understand that Tom Pickering, another famous foreign service celebrity, will be here today at lunch, and I think you will very much enjoy that. His wife, Alice, will be sorely missed by many of you who are friends of her today. Now, as you heard, I'm Maria Otero. I am the Undersecretary for Civilian Security, Democracy, and Human Rights. In the State Department, we now call my neck of the woods J. I'll explain that. This position is new to most of you, but it reflects a recent reorganization in the State Department, which was recommended by Secretary Clinton as part of the Quadrennial Diplomacy and Development Renew, the QDDR, which Deputy Secretary Steinberg spoke to you about last year during the same day. The QDDR is really the Department of State's strategic plan to help it look ahead and see how it will do the work that it needs to do. The importance of the reorganization is that it really follows Secretary Clinton's vision of what the Department of State should be doing, what our foreign policy should be in a very quickly changing world of the 21st century, and the importance of why our foreign policy should change with it as we advance. In one of her major speeches that she gave early on, the Secretary said, "Our approach to foreign policy must reflect the world as it is, not as it used to be." And she went on to describe two inescapable facts that set the parameters for foreign policy and development today. The first one is that no one nation can meet the world's challenges alone. The issues are too complex, and the threatening actors that are playing in the global arena are not just states, which was really the case during the Cold War and during earlier years. But today the players are non-state players. There are criminal cartels, there are terrorist cells, there are rebel units, and those that are engaging globally, whether they are non-government organizations or corporations, find that their work is directly affected by the presence of these non-state actors in the world that we see today. The second unescapable fact is that nations around the world are concerned by the same global threats, so that making wide-ranging and deep cooperation among countries is not just a smart move, it's a necessary move. So these two facts demand a different way of global engagement for us, and they demand then a different architecture as we look at the 21st century. And if we put on top of that we're operating in an ever-tightening budget period of time, we also need to be more efficient. So we need to work more closely and more collaboratively with non-governmental actors, and we need to face these threats and these opportunities in a way in which we are nimble in doing it. And on top of that, if our actions are going to meet our ambition, we need to be efficient. So in order to be all of these things, nimble, efficient, engaged, the United States needs to employ and deploy civilian power, leveraging the great work of the Department of State, of AID, and of more than 40 organizations for the US government that are operating internationally. This is what Secretary Clinton meant when she talked about the importance of being able to get a greater balance between diplomacy, defense, and development. Now, at the State Department, elevating our civilian power means better understanding how our diplomats and policymakers are supporting governments, other governments, as those governments provide for and protect their own citizens. As we help those governments develop stronger and more just societies. In other words, it's how we advance civilian security. Now, this concept of civilian security is grounded in our understanding that we will only achieve sustainable peace when we resolve the underlying grievances of individuals. And it also acknowledges that the conflicts and the crises that are present in so many countries today have to be preventing some of these or mitigating their occurrence has to be one of our foreign policy objectives. So to do this, we need to help governments develop institutions that are going to help provide for their own citizens. This means helping other governments respect the basic rights of their citizens. It means civilian police forces that are rooted in the rule of law and that are set up not to repress but to protect. It includes court and justice systems that are able to hold their citizens accountable. it includes a wide range of things. And when we look at security this way, we note that there are many parts of the Department of State that are in one way or another advancing civilian security, from protection of human rights to provision of humanitarian aid, where we are the largest providers of assistance, to combating human and drug trafficking, to improving law enforcement, to the rule of law, to efforts to counter violent extremism and terrorism, and the work that we do to help punish the crimes against humanity. Each one of these elements is one piece of a larger puzzle that helps governments create societies that are more just and that are more responsive to their citizens. Now, if we pull all of these together under one undersecretary, who happens to be me, we are creating a more holistic, a more cohesive, and a more coherent approach to support this effort to protect individuals, which ultimately will lead to greater stability of nations. So the new J family, J for Justice, replaces the G family. And I can tell you, getting that change from G to J took months of work. That was quite nobody wanted to let go of G, but J makes sense today. And it's made up of 5 bureaus and 3 offices. And it enables the greater collaboration among these bureaus and the effort for us to become more efficient and more effective. And it means that a piece that was under global affairs before, which was environment, the Bureau of Oceans, Environment, and Science, now belongs with the Bureaus of Economic Work and of Energy Development, which is now pulled together through a new bureau. So we have those pieces which integrate between the 3 working together. With the coordination of the bureaus at J in the State Department, we now really have the ability to take a more comprehensive view of the resources that we have available to address security. We have about $4.5 billion in programming and about 1,500 civil service, foreign service, and wonderful professionals of the State Department here in Washington and abroad. And this realignment, bringing them all together, also allows me to see more where there are opportunities and where there are gaps in which we can create improvement. This reorganization also means that internally we have to work in a more collaborative way, and that we need to work towards shared goals. And we know that if you are part of a bureau, you work in your bureau. That is your area of the sandbox in which you stay. And what we are trying to do here is really have bureaus cross those pieces of the field and be able to work with each other with the same goal. So for example, we have our Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor Bureau, TRL. I'm so glad I can use some of those acronyms with you. Working much more closely with the International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Bureau, because if we're training police forces, we need to make sure that they are trained not only understanding their role as police officers, but also understanding issues related to human rights and to the respect that they need to bring as part of their work. They need to work with the Office of Trafficking in Persons, again, to help police understand this crime of human trafficking and their role in addressing it. Our new Counterterrorism Bureau needs to work more closely with our Office of Global Youth Issues in order to counter extremism and in order to help direct youth in a different direction. So as we reorient ourselves internally, we have also taken some steps to shift in what we call our global engagement, some new initiatives that make sense today. And I just quickly want to mention 3. The first one is, in our long history of promoting good and global and quality governance at the country level, President Obama last September launched what is called the Open Government Partnership, OGP. And he launched it along with 7 other countries around the world and with several civil society organizations. What Open Government Partnership attempts to do is engage countries in becoming more open. And it engages them in committing themselves to put together a plan for how it is that they will become more transparent, more accountable to their people, and will seek more participation by their citizens. And they're working and doing this hand in hand with civil society organizations. It's fascinating to us that in 8 months since this was launched, more than 55 countries have lined up to be able to be part of open government. And just to be part of it, there is eligibility criteria. You have to already demonstrate that you want to be able to be an open society. And we are really quite amazed at how it is that there is an appetite among countries to be able to play on the side of being more transparent and more accountable. And this speaks to what Secretary Clinton said recently in Brazil at the meeting of the Open Government Partnership, which was attended by more than 1,200 people from 70 countries. And she said, you know, as we look ahead, we are not going to really divide the world up in countries that are in the east or the west or the north or the south or the poor or the rich. We're going to divide them according to which are open and which are closed. And this is a new way of looking at this issue that is enormously important as we move ahead. The second part of our global engagement has to mirror also the people that we are working with, the people that we are interacting with, the populations that we're trying to support and reach. We know that globally, 60% of the world's population is under 30. We know that the young population is growing as a percentage of the total demographics of countries. And of course, who you call young really depends on how old you are. I've been, kicking that bar up so that now I think anybody under 42, 43 maybe can be considered young. But you understand we use that number freely. But if we talk generally, we really are talking about people that are under 30. And we see in some countries that 60 to 70% of the population is below 30. So to respond to this, Secretary Clinton launched an Office of Global Youth Issues this year. And working with it, we see that it is an opportunity to integrate youth into the way in which we do our work so that we have input from them as we make our own foreign policy. But we also find ways of integrating with them in a way that offers economic opportunity to the vast majority who are poor, but it also creates the opportunity to empower those who can become change agents in their own countries. A third and final way in which we are looking at a new approach in which the Secretary has taken on in this global engagement effort is to engage with civil society more intentionally and more intensely. She has created a strategic dialogue with civil society, which is modeled with the strategic dialogues that we hold with different countries, which is exactly what Secretary Clinton is doing in China right now. These kind of strategic dialogues we hold with probably 20 different countries, among those that are the most important in their regions and in the work that we do. And in this work with civil society, it means that we need to be able to incorporate civil society into our policymaking process, and we need to be able to listen to them and to hear their input, which is close to the ground and which helps us from having that point of view. So she's elevated the discussion with civil society to a level where we have annual strategic dialogues with them and working groups on specific issues like human rights, like religion and foreign policy, and a variety of other ones. This civil society dialogue is going to convene its global summit here in Washington this month. And it really underscores the importance that we're giving to this issue. So these are just some examples of the new ways in which we are engaging with the world and in which we are creating new mechanisms to do so. These are not only reflecting our effort to elevate civilian power and focusing on civilian security, but also engaging beyond the traditional state actors with whom we have always interacted in our foreign policy making, and seeing 21st century approach to diplomacy as being built to be able to go out in these directions, but absolutely based on the very strong foundation that you created for it and that you provided in the time that you served, and you served so well. So let me thank you for your service to the United States, for your continued commitment to the Department of State, and to the work that we are doing. And with that, let me just make myself available to some of your questions. Thank you.
One or two questions so that we can stay on schedule. Thank you very much.
My name is Bill Root, retired Foreign Service officer. I have been told that I'm the only one while in Vietnam who submitted a dissent message when that war was expanded into Cambodia. And my question is there a parallel between Syria and Kosovo? In Kosovo, when President Clinton finally decided to deploy ground forces, Milosevic immediately caved, and it was not necessary to use the ground forces. In Syria, are there reasons to believe that Assad would or would not respond to a credible threat to use ground forces as contrasted with the actual use of such force?
Thank you. We are clearly right in the midst of a very difficult situation in Syria, and we are using, to the extent possible, all the means that we have, that the international community has created to be able to address these issues. We've made some progress, but we see that Assad has violated some of the agreements that he has made. One of the concerns with Syria also is the degree to which the opposition that is fighting the Assad regime can come together and can really operate as an opposition, as we saw in Libya, which is really probably a country where you can draw some similarities as well. So I think certainly before we think about ground forces or any kind of military presence, we're going to continue working in these areas of strengthening the opposition, of addressing the humanitarian issue, in which we are working very closely right now, and in really continuing to find ways to help end the Assad regime as fast as we can. But these are some of the issues that we have before us.
Eugene Braderman. I had 33 years of service, but more than 2 generations ago. And I find that our foreign policy concerns are a lot more complex today than they were then. I have a question with respect to one of the 3 major areas that you're concerned with, and that's human rights. In the United States, we value a human life very much, more than most countries around the world. And I think that's one of the elements of our greatness, that's so important. But I'm puzzled by something that is occurring these days, and that is that an individual, a single individual, a non-citizen, whose views we don't know, whose actions we don't control, can have such a great influence on the development of a discussion between 2 major powers on what our relationship should be. I wonder if you can explain
You know, I don't know if I can explain that, but I think it's important for us to note that the work that we are doing in human rights is an effort to help countries develop freedom of expression, freedom of association, freedom of action, all the freedoms that we value through the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is really the framework that we use in doing this work. Among those are human rights defenders who are in their own countries defending the human rights of their own citizens of their own country. We support the human rights defenders. In fact, we even have resources that can help them address issues, or that can help them when they're in a difficult situation. And we believe that it's very important to support them because they are the ones that are also promoting the voice that we have and the value that we give to human rights. There are some cases, and this can be one case, Burma can be another case, where human rights defenders also have a universal following, if you will, because of the work that they are doing and because of the importance that they are doing. And that's, I think, what we are seeing right now in the very case that you are referring to. And there are others that can be the same. And I would say that, you know, we will continue supporting human rights defenders because we see it as part of our work. But how it is that the larger community of institutions and the larger community of people around the world focus on some of these situations and give them a great deal of importance is something that we can't control. And I think we're seeing some of that happening right now. But to the extent that, and let me just finish by saying, one of the things that this department does now, as you well know, is put out a human rights report once a year in which it details the human rights situation in each country in the world. That report has become now one of the most credible, one of the most important, and one of the most useful guidelines in this area of human rights that is available to anybody who's interested in it. So, and I think the State Department needs to be proud of the fact that it is being able to develop this material and to be able to provide it. So I would just leave you with that sense of the overall picture is our effort to really continue pushing human rights as part of our foreign policy.
May you indulge us, we're a bit behind schedule, and if I can just take one more question for the Undersecretary. There are people waiting for her at another event. Thank you.
I'm Barbara Bowie Whitman. I served the government for 34 years, including 30 in this building.
Thank you.
My first job was as economic officer in the very first Bureau of Human Rights, working for Pat Darian. And the first assignment I had in that job was to go to Milwaukee. Why? To explain why we would not fund, through the Exim Bank, the sale of turbines for the Yacyretá power project based on human rights violations in Argentina at that time. And the title of my talk was Reconciling Our Economic Interests with Human Rights Concerns. That was a long time ago. What's happening in the last week makes me feel that perhaps the shoe is on the other foot right now. I know it's the same topic you just covered, so you may not have to talk a lot more about it, but I was sent out to say we gave up a major export sale because of our concern. It appears to be the other way around right now.
You know, one of the, just briefly say that it is, you know, as soon as one of these issues gets so much publicity and is talked about, and it's still in the process of being resolved, we can draw conclusions about the way in which we're working in all of these issues. But I think it is important as we look at the work that we're doing in human rights that we have really expanded our work considerably. We have some of the best people working in the area of human rights inside the department, pursuing this work as they did before heading up human rights organizations. In fact, our Assistant Secretary, Mike Posner, came from Human Rights First, one of the leading human rights organizations. So clearly, the effort is to really proceed with these issues. It's not easy, and interestingly, to go back to the issue that you're raising on the economics and human rights, one of the places where we're working very closely in this, and which is complex, is in the area of conflict minerals, especially in the Great Lakes. And I bring it up because this has led to legislation, the Dodd-Frank legislation, that is addressing specifically the human rights issues as our own companies are involved in extracting minerals from this country. So I just give that as one example. But overall, I think it really is important to look, and we have a website, humanrights.gov, that I would invite you to visit so that you really can get a sense of the work that is being done. Because Secretary Clinton and President Obama are absolutely committed to human rights and to this area of work as part of the way in which we do our foreign policy. Thank you. Thank you.
And hopefully we can send this to questioning and we can get it to the Undersecretary. Undersecretary Otero is now going to preside over the APSA Memorial Plaque Ceremony on the C Street lobby. Because there's not sufficient space for everyone there, I would ask that you remain in this room and you can see it on the monitors that they will be using. Thank you very much. And as we end, I'd like to give a hand of applause to all of our volunteers and supporters who have helped us.